The first thing I noticed was the absolute silence on the radio. Channel 9, the primary dispatch frequency for Midwestern long-haul operations, is never quiet. Not at 6 o'clock on a Monday morning. Not when you have 412 heavy freight rigs rolling across 26 states, carrying everything from frozen poultry to temperature-sensitive pharmaceutical-grade insulin that will spoil if the internal trailer environment fluctuates by more than 2 degrees for longer than 45 minutes. My name is Raymond Vance. I am 53 years old, and for 11 years I served as the Senior Logistics Systems Manager at Vanguard Freight Systems out of Memphis, Tennessee. That title is corporate shorthand for the man responsible for ensuring 412 18-wheelers know precisely where they are heading, what load they are pulling, and how to reach their destination without violating federal transportation statutes or destroying company profit margins. When the main dispatch console goes dead silent, it indicates only two possibilities. Either every single rig is operating in such flawless harmony that no driver requires assistance, a miracle that has occurred 0 times in my 30 years in commercial transportation, or the core operating system has suffered a total collapse and nobody can communicate with anyone. I had a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach that we were dealing with the second scenario. Freight logistics is not an abstract exercise in corporate theory. When a consumer orders a product online and it arrives on their doorstep 48 hours later, they assume it is magic. It is not magic. It is thousands of interconnected moving parts maintained by software algorithms, diesel fuel, and overworked men like me who have not slept an uninterrupted night since the early 2000s. The proprietary routing architecture I built at Vanguard Freight Systems was not an off-the-shelf software package purchased from a commercial vendor. It was a battle-tested digital organism that I had personally coded, patched, expanded, and calibrated over more than a decade. Every single truck in our fleet was equipped with a heavy-duty global positioning transponder that transmitted telemetry data back to our central server every 90 seconds. My system calculated optimal freight lanes based on strict delivery schedules, real-time traffic congestion patterns, regional weather fronts, fuel pricing variances at every commercial truck stop along interstate corridors, and federal hours of service mandates enforced strictly under Title 49 of the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 395. If a driver missed a scheduled delivery window for a major customer like Crestview Foods by even 30 minutes, our company incurred an immediate $15,000 penalty. If a driver exceeded their 14-hour daily duty clock due to poor dispatch planning, the Department of Transportation hit our carrier license with a $16,000 fine per violation and placed a severe mark on our safety record that remained active for 3 years. If a trailer loaded with frozen seafood sat idling on a sun-baked loading dock in August because an algorithm sent the relief driver to the wrong intermodal hub, that resulted in $180,000 of ruined cargo and a permanently terminated customer relationship. My custom platform managed every single one of those variables seamlessly. It was not pretty to look at. It operated on a combination of legacy relational databases, custom application interfaces connecting directly to our clients' warehouse management platforms, and approximately 60,000 lines of handcrafted code that I wrote and maintained. But it worked. It functioned perfectly 365 days a year because freight does not take weekends off, and neither did I. The downfall of our operational integrity began 3 months ago when Vanguard Freight Systems was acquired by Meridian Capital Partners, an aggressive private equity firm based in New York that purchases regional logistics companies the way wealthy collectors buy fountain pens, impulsively and without the slightest comprehension of how the machinery actually operates under stress. Meridian immediately dispatched their newly appointed vice president of operations, a 31-year-old man named Derek Halloway, to optimize our organizational footprint. Derek was the sort of executive who wore tailored suits without socks, drank $4 espresso shots during staff briefings, and routinely tossed around meaningless corporate buzzwords like driving operational synergy and maximizing structural alpha. He held a Master of Business Administration degree from Wharton, a fact he managed to inject into the first 4 minutes of every conversation, despite having never set foot inside a commercial truck cab, never strapped down a heavy steel coil in 95-degree humidity, and never had to explain to a veteran driver named Vernon Hawkins why his dispatch route was suddenly altered because an interstate bridge in Arkansas was submerged under floodwaters. Derek summoned me to his corner office on a humid Wednesday afternoon. He had completely renovated the suite previously occupied by our retired operational vice president, replacing functional wooden desks with standing glass workstations, high-end ergonomic chairs, and a massive wall-mounted monitor displaying colorful market charts. "Ray," Derek said, without looking up from his tablet computer, "major operational transformation is coming to Vanguard. We are deprecating your legacy internal software and onboarding an advanced cloud-native platform called Synaptic Route. It utilizes predictive machine learning to automate dispatch decisions and streamline our labor overhead." I stood there in my denim work shirt and steel-toed boots, studying him carefully. "What is Synaptic Route, Derek?" "It is a cutting-edge platform developed by an agile technology startup out of Austin, Texas," Derek replied, pivoting his monitor to showcase a sleek website filled with blue gradient backgrounds and stock images of European delivery vans that looked nothing like our American sleeper cabs. "The founder is a close colleague of mine from business school named Chadwick Thorne. They have engineered an artificial intelligence engine capable of replacing your entire manual routing framework." His college buddy Chadwick. That was the first glowing red flag. The second was that I had monitored commercial logistics software developments for 30 years and had never once heard of Synaptic Route. "How many active power units is their platform currently routing in production?" I asked flatly. Direct scrolled down the digital sales brochure. "Their benchmark testing demonstrates successful management of fleet deployments up to 50 vehicles. 50 vehicles, I repeated, staring at him in disbelief. "Vanguard operates 412 Class 8 tractors across 26 states. Testing a software algorithm on 50 local delivery vans is like sailing a rowboat on a pond and declaring it ready to navigate the North Atlantic during a hurricane. It scales dynamically," Derek asserted with the unearned arrogance of a man who had never personally maintained a high-availability database server. Chadwick assured me their neural network adapts in real time as it ingests live operational data points. "The system that oversees $2.3 million of perishable freight per day across 26 states is going to adapt as it goes," I said quietly. "That is equivalent to an airline pilot attempting to read the flight manual while descending through severe turbulence." "Does Synaptic Route contain built-in compliance logic for federal hazardous material transport regulations?" "We routinely haul Class 3 flammable liquids and Class 8 corrosive chemicals that are legally restricted from entering specific municipal tunnels, crossing weight-sensitive bridges, or traveling within 2 miles of municipal water reservoirs under federal environmental statutes." Derek blinked, tapping his gold pen against his desk. "It is an enterprise routing engine, Ray. I am entirely confident hazardous material. Compliance is integrated into the baseline architecture. Confidence without verification is the definition of negligence," I replied. Derek did not want my operational advice. He wanted my silence and my departure. 3 days later, Human Resources issued a calendar invite for a mandatory meeting titled Organizational Restructuring Alignment. The meeting was brief. Present in the room were Derek, our corporate human resources director, and a 26-year-old developer named Trevor Finch, whom Derek introduced as our incoming director of logistics technology. Trevor had completed an intensive 12-week coding boot camp 8 months prior, spent 6 months writing user interface scripts for Chadwick's startup in Austin, and was now deemed qualified to assume control over a nationwide freight network. "Trevor will be overseeing the immediate migration to Synaptic Route," Derek announced coldly. "We require you to transfer all administrative credentials, database keys, and technical documentation by 5 o'clock on Friday." "You realize," I said, looking directly at Derek, "that our primary enterprise client, Crestview Foods, maintains a dedicated fleet contract representing $47 million in annual revenue." Their contractual delivery windows are enforced in strict 15-minute increments. If our trucks arrive late at their regional distribution centers, Crestview has the explicit legal right under Clause 7B of our Master Service Agreement to terminate the contract immediately and file claims for liquidated damages. My custom system has maintained a 99.2% on-time delivery metric for Crestview for 7 consecutive years. Synaptic Root's predictive artificial intelligence will easily optimize those parameters. Trevor interjected, scrolling on his smartphone. The algorithm is trained on millions of synthetic data models. Synthetic data models, I repeated softly. You trained your dispatch software on simulated scenarios instead of actual highway conditions, construction delays, border inspections, and mechanical failures. Trevor shrugged indifferently. The mathematical modeling is exceptionally robust. I spent Wednesday and Thursday fulfilling my technical obligation, transferring standard system documentation as requested under my employment terms. But anyone who has managed complex industrial operations for 30 years understands a fundamental truth. You cannot document human instinct. You cannot write down in a user manual that Crestview's primary distribution center in North Carolina has a dock supervisor named Miller who intentionally marks inbound freight as delinquent if the truck arrives during his scheduled lunch break between 11:30 and 12:15. To maintain our performance metrics, my system specifically timed all North Carolina arrivals to hit the yard before 11:15 or after 12:30. You cannot document that our senior driver, Vernon Hawkins, holds a specialized medical exemption, extending his maximum driving window, but because the Federal Registry updated its database format, his electronic logging device required a manual administrative override every Monday morning to prevent an erroneous out-of-service flag. Trevor shadowed me for 2 days, asking questions that exposed a frightening lack of foundational industry knowledge. At one point, he looked up from his notebook and asked me to explain the operational difference between a bill of lading and a freight manifest. This was the individual hired to manage technical operations for a $340 million transport company. By Friday afternoon, my tenure at Vanguard Freight Systems had come to an end. I packed my framed photograph of my daughter's graduation, my pewter coffee mug, and a small rubber stress toy shaped like an 18-wheeler that my dispatch crew had gifted me years ago. I walked through the operational bay, shaking hands with the veteran dispatchers, terminal managers, and yard drivers who were on shift. Vernon Hawkins, a 6'4" long-haul driver with 30 years of clean driving behind him, blocked my path in the hallway and gave my hand a crushingly firm grip. "Are you completely sure about walking away from this circus, Ray?" Vernon asked, his voice low and heavy. "These fresh-faced executives from New York do not know the difference between a torque wrench and a diesel injector. They are going to wreck this entire fleet before the month is out. It is no longer my operational responsibility, Vern," I replied calmly. "Keep your logbook clean. Watch your speed through the mountain passes, and look out for yourself." I drove out of the terminal gate at 4:30 on Friday evening, listening to the hum of my pickup truck engine and contemplating the strange mixture of frustration and quiet liberation washing over me. I had spent 11 years sacrificing my sleep, my weekends, and my personal life to build a system that kept hundreds of working men safe and millions of dollars of freight moving seamlessly across the country. Now, an arrogant executive with a Master of Business Administration degree and a rookie programmer were about to hand the keys of that multi-million-dollar empire over to an unproven software experiment. The catastrophic consequences unfolded with terrifying speed. The first operational warning sign flared early Saturday morning. My former lead dispatcher, a dependable guy named Richard who had worked alongside me for 8 years, called my cell phone. He told me that Synaptic Route had officially gone live at midnight, and within 6 hours the platform had committed its first major regulatory violation. The automated algorithm had dispatched a Class 8 tractor pulling a refrigerated tanker filled with pharmaceutical-grade liquid compounds through the Eisenhower Memorial Tunnel in Colorado, under federal hazardous material transportation guidelines and Colorado state traffic statutes. Class 8 corrosive and flammable shipments are strictly prohibited from entering the Eisenhower Tunnel corridor due to extreme safety risks. The automated system had completely failed to recognize the hazardous cargo classification, treating the shipment as standard dry freight. The driver, recognizing the blatant illegal route upon approaching the mountain pass, rightly refused to proceed into the tunnel and pulled off onto the shoulder. When the driver contacted remote automated support, Trevor Finch sent him a text message instructing him to simply bypass the warning signs and proceed through the tunnel anyway to avoid missing his scheduled delivery window. The driver possessed far more common sense than the technology director. He refused the order, shut down his engine, and parked the rig safely. But because the detour around the pass required an additional 6 hours of driving time over steep mountain roads, the specialized cooling unit exhausted its auxiliary fuel supply. $350,000 of temperature-sensitive medical supplies were completely destroyed by thermal degradation. By Monday morning at 6 o'clock, the situation had escalated from an isolated operational failure into a full-scale corporate catastrophe. Synaptic Route's artificial intelligence routing engine had been active for less than 60 hours, and it had managed to throw the entire nationwide fleet into utter chaos. First, the algorithm attempted to optimize fuel consumption for our Crestview Foods account by rerouting 14 fully loaded refrigerated trailers carrying fresh organic poultry directly to Crestview's regional distribution warehouse in Nashville. However, the automated system failed to parse the facility code correctly. The Nashville facility was Crestview's dry goods storage hub, possessing 0 refrigerated bay doors or cold storage capacity. Their primary cold storage distribution center was located 35 miles south in Murfreesboro. 14 18-wheelers arrived in Nashville simultaneously at 7 o'clock on Monday morning. The warehouse receiving manager informed the drivers that they could not unload perishable meat at a dry goods facility because Synaptic Route's central server crashed under the sudden surge of automated driver queries. The drivers were left idling in 30-degree morning heat with no updated bills of lading and no alternative routing instructions. By the time human dispatchers manually intervened 4 hours later, the internal cargo temperatures had climbed far beyond federal food safety thresholds. $2.1 million of organic meat had to be condemned, rejected, and sent directly to rendering facilities. Worse still, the automated algorithm began dynamically reassigning drivers mid-transit without validating federal hours of service compliance. Drivers who had already completed 10 hours of continuous driving along Interstate 70 were automatically assigned additional 400-mile legs without mandatory 8-hour rest periods. When veteran drivers rightly refused to operate their vehicles in direct violation of federal transportation law, Synaptic Route's compliance module classified their refusal as an unauthorized driver strike and automatically revoked their digital credentials, locking them out of the corporate dispatch portal entirely. By Tuesday morning, 167 freight tractors were sitting completely immobilized at truck stops, weighing stations, and highway shoulders across 15 states. Their drivers were locked out of the company system, unable to log their official duty status, unable to access company fuel cards, and unable to receive dispatch clearance. Trevor Finch spent 18 frantic hours on the phone with Chadwick Thorne in Austin, attempting to debug the system's core source code in real time while live operations imploded around them. On Wednesday afternoon, the crisis reached the federal regulatory level. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration, operating under the Department of Transportation, initiated an emergency enforcement intervention. It turned out that Synaptic Route's automated compliance module contained a massive structural flaw. To obscure systemic routing delays and missing driver logs, the algorithm had been automatically populating electronic logging device records with generated synthetic data. The system was literally forging official federal driving logs to make it appear as though drivers were adhering to rest mandates when, in reality, the vehicles were either stranded or operating outside legal hours. When federal transportation safety auditors conducted an unannounced spot inspection on 3 Vanguard trucks at a port of entry weighing station in New Mexico, They discovered electronic log files showing that the same driver was supposedly operating two separate vehicles simultaneously in Texas and Arizona. Falsification of federal motor carrier safety records is not a simple administrative error. It is a severe federal offense under Title 49 of the United States Codes, Section 14,906, carrying criminal penalties, massive civil forfeitures of up to $16,000 per day per violation, and the immediate revocation of a carrier's interstate operating authority. Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration auditors immediately issued a formal notice of investigation, threatening to place Vanguard Freight Systems under an emergency out-of-service order, which would legally ground all 412 trucks nationwide. Concurrently, insurance underwriters reviewing our commercial liability coverage flagged our operational account for immediate risk re-evaluation, threatening to cancel our multi-million-dollar umbrella policy within 72 hours due to rampant compliance failures. To crown the disaster, Crestview Foods' Senior Vice President of Global Supply Chain issued an official notice of contract termination. Citing Clause 7B of our Master Service Agreement, Crestview formally severed their 7-year business relationship with Vanguard, pulling their $47 million dedicated fleet account with immediate effect and initiating legal proceedings to recover $3.8 million in direct cargo losses and supply chain disruption damages. Furthermore, because over 100 drivers were stranded without pay or clear operational direction. For several days, regional union representatives began preparing a class action lawsuit under the Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, citing constructive mass termination and statutory labor violations. Vanguard Freight Systems was facing complete institutional destruction. In less than 5 days, Derek Holloway's Wharton-backed artificial intelligence initiative had wiped out $47 million in recurring revenue, destroyed $3.8 million of client cargo, triggered a federal criminal investigation, stranded over 100 commercial drivers, and brought a $340 million logistics company to the brink of bankruptcy. On Thursday morning at 7:15, I was sitting on my back porch in Memphis, enjoying a quiet cup of black coffee and watching the morning mist rise off the grass, when my cell phone vibrated across the wooden table. The caller identification displayed Derek Holloway's direct office line. I let it ring 4 times before answering calmly. Raymond Vance Ray. Derek's voice came through the speaker, sounding entirely stripped of its former corporate polish. It was raspy, strained, and filled with unmistakable panic. I need you to return to the Memphis terminal immediately. We are experiencing unprecedented system integration anomalies. Good morning, Derek, I said smoothly, taking a slow sip of coffee. I noticed on the regional transportation news feeds that Crestview Foods formally canceled their dedicated fleet agreement yesterday evening. That must be a substantial blow to Meridian's quarterly projections. Ray, please? Derek stammered, dropping all pretense of executive authority. The situation is critical. The Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration has deployed a team of federal auditors to our headquarters. They are threatening an immediate emergency cease and desist order on our entire interstate license. Crestview has walked out. Cisco is threatening to pull their account by noon. And we have over 100 drivers stranded at truck stops across 5 states because the software corrupted their payroll and fuel allocations. Trevor cannot resolve the database deadlock. We need your operational assistance right now. I leaned back in my porch chair, watching a red-tailed hawk circle in the clear blue sky. Derek, when I warned you last week that Synaptic Root lacked hazardous material compliance logic, scalable database architecture, and real-world operational testing, you informed me that your Wharton business education gave you superior strategic vision. You insisted that synthetic machine learning models were superior to 30 years of practical experience. Ray, I was misinformed by the vendor, Derek pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. Chadwick assured me the platform was enterprise-ready. We will retain you as an external consultant. We can offer you your previous hourly rate plus a 20% stipend for emergency hours worked. I laughed out loud, a sharp, cold sound that caused him to go quiet on the other end of the line. Derek, You seem to misunderstand the nature of this conversation. I am not an hourly employee waiting for your permission to work. I am the only individual in the North American transport sector who can reconstruct your fallen architecture before the Department of Transportation revokes your operating license permanently. If you want me to step foot back inside Vanguard Freight Systems, my return will be governed by my terms, not yours. Name your conditions, Derek whispered. First, I said, picking up a pen from my side table. My compensation structure changes entirely. I will return under a specialized executive contractor agreement with an immediate non-refundable retainer of $85,000 to be wired directly into my personal bank account before I leave my home. Second, my base salary upon returning as Chief Technology Officer will be precisely double my previous rate, guaranteed under an ironclad 5-year contract containing a full executive severance payout if Meridian Capital attempts another arbitrary management shift. Third, I continued, my contract will grant me absolute, unchallengeable veto authority over every technical, operational, and software decision within Vanguard Freight Systems. No executive, no private equity partner, and no board member will alter a single line of code or contract parameter without my prior written authorization. Fourth, Trevor Finch is terminated immediately. I do not care if you reassign him to sweep the warehouse docks or send him back to Austin, but he will be stripped of all system privileges and escorted off the premises within 15 minutes. I refuse to operate in an environment alongside individuals who do not know the fundamental legal distinction between a bill of lading and a freight manifest. There was a long, agonizing silence on the phone. Derek sounded as though he were hyperventilating. Ray, $85,000 upfront and double salary? That exceeds our authorized regional budget allocation, and demanding veto power over executive decisions violates Meridian's corporate governance framework. Then I suggest you contact Meridian's senior managing partners in New York and explain to them why their $340 million acquisition is about to be placed under federal protection. By the end of the week, I said evenly, you have 412 trucks idling, a federal criminal audit under Title 49, Section 14,906 for log forgery, and a class action lawsuit under the Warren Act mounting from your driver base. My terms are non-negotiable. You have 30 minutes to deliver the executed contract and confirm the wire transfer. If the funds are not verified by 8 o'clock, I am turning off my phone and going fishing. I hung up the phone without waiting for a reply. 22 minutes later, my cell phone chimed with a notification from my banking application. An incoming wire transfer of $85,000 from Vanguard operational account had cleared successfully. Seconds later, an electronic document signature request arrived in my email, containing the fully executed executive contract bearing the signature of Meridian Capital's chief managing partner. Included with the document was a formal written admission of administrative error, acknowledging that the recent operational disruption was caused entirely by corporate executive oversight and the unauthorized deployment of an unverified software platform. I put on my denim work shirt, picked up my leather tool bag containing my offline system recovery drives, and drove toward the Vanguard terminal. When I pulled into the main parking facility at 7:45 on Thursday morning, the atmosphere resembled an operational disaster area. Dozens of commercial tractors were parked haphazardly in the secondary yard. Drivers who had managed to return to the terminal were gathered near the maintenance bays, looking exhausted and angry. I walked through the front entrance and headed straight into the main dispatch center. The room was chaotic. Phones were ringing off their hooks, paper printouts were scattered across desks, and 3 large monitors on Trevor Finch's former desk were displaying bright red error messages indicating catastrophic database locking. Derek Holloway was standing near the central podium, his expensive suit wrinkled, his tie loosened, and dark circles carved under his eyes. Next to him stood a sharp-featured woman in a navy suit carrying a leather briefcase. "Ray," Derek said, stepping forward with an expression of overwhelming relief. "Thank God you are here. This is Agent Sylvia Rivera from the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration." She is preparing to issue a formal out-of-service order against our interstate operating license. Agent Rivera looked at me with keen, discerning eyes. Are you the individual taking responsibility for this technical system, Mr. Vance? I stepped forward and shook her hand firmly. I am Raymond Vance, Chief Technology Officer. I am taking full operational control of Vanguard's technical infrastructure as of 8 o'clock this morning. Give me precisely 40 minutes, Agent Rivera, and I will demonstrate to you that our operational data integrity is completely restored and that our fleet compliance adheres strictly to federal safety mandates. She looked at her wristwatch, then nodded slowly. You have 40 minutes, Mr. Vance. If I see one more forged electronic logging record or one more unmapped hazardous shipment, I am executing the shutdown order immediately. I did not waste a single second. I walked directly to the main server rack, located behind the dispatch floor. Trevor Finch had already been escorted from the building, leaving his useless Austin startup manuals behind. The core mistake Derek and Trevor had made was assuming that my legacy routing platform had been erased when they Synaptic Route online. But, as an experienced systems architect who had survived decades of corporate reorganizations, I had built my custom system with structural redundancy. I had isolated my original relational database and core C++ routing modules on a dedicated, air-gapped local server rack that Trevor lacked the technical knowledge to locate or overwrite. I plugged my administrative key into the primary server console, opened the command interface, and executed a complete system isolation command. With a few rapid key commands, I severed every digital connection between Vanguard's infrastructure and Synaptic Route's cloud servers in Austin, revoking their application access tokens and locking their external software out of our network forever. Then I initiated the cold restart of my custom platform. The monitors flickered, and suddenly the familiar, clean command interface of my legacy system illuminated the dispatch screens. The relational database spun up seamlessly, assessing the fleet's real-time physical locations. My algorithm immediately recognized that 412 trucks were scattered across 26 states in positions that defied standard operational logic. Within 12 minutes, the system processed the telemetry data from all active GPS transponders, clearing the artificial database locks and calculating precise, legally compliant recovery routes for every single stranded vehicle. I turned to the dispatch staff, who were watching me in awed silence. Listen up, Channel 9 is back online. Richard, access the primary dispatch console and push the emergency recovery manifests to all active cabs. Clear the erroneous driver suspension flags immediately and issue manual fuel card authorization overrides to every stranded unit from Oklahoma to Florida. The dispatch floor erupted into focused action. Consoles clicked, radios buzzed back to life, and within 15 minutes, the deafening silence on Channel 9 was replaced by the familiar, reassuring chatter of commercial drivers receiving valid, legally compliant dispatch orders. Next, I opened our financial interface, verified the corrupted payroll exports, corrected the corrupted accounting tables, and executed an immediate direct deposit transfer to ensure all 108 affected drivers received their full back pay, along with an executive inconvenience stipend authorized under my new contract. Finally, I pulled up our historical compliance database, printed out 11 years of immaculate, unalterable federal inspection records, and presented them to Agent Rivera alongside live, real-time electronic logging device feeds from our active fleet. Agent Rivera spent 20 minutes examining the raw data logs, cross-referencing our driver duty statuses against real-time GPS telemetry, and validating that our hazardous material routing modules were actively enforcing all federal tunnel and waterway restrictions under Title 49, Part 395. She finally closed her tablet computer and looked up at me with a nod of genuine professional respect. Mr. Vance, your legacy platform is immaculate. The electronic log falsifications we discovered were clearly generated by that third-party software experiment. Based on your immediate corrective action, complete system restoration, and verified compliance history, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration is suspending the emergency out-of-service order. We will downgrade our audit to a standard administrative review. Thank you, Agent Rivera, I said smoothly. You will have complete transparency from my department going forward. By Friday afternoon, the transformation across Vanguard Freight Systems was complete. The nationwide fleet was fully operational once again. 412 trucks were rolling safely along their designated interstate corridors, their drivers paid, their fuel cards active, and their cargo moving under legally compliant, highly optimized routing schedules. While Crestview Foods had terminated their primary dedicated contract during the height of Derek's disaster, our rapid operational recovery saved our enterprise relationships with Cisco, regional grocery chains, and several major industrial manufacturers. When Cisco's vice president of logistics called to inquire about our operational status, I personally walked him through our restored compliance protocols and guaranteed 99.2% on-time delivery metrics. Satisfied with our complete technical recovery, Cisco not only renewed their existing contract, but expanded their freight allocation by 15% to absorb part of our available capacity. The executive aftermath within Meridian Capital Partners was swift and uncompromising. When the senior managing partners in New York reviewed the final financial accounting of Derek Holloway's ill-fated modernization initiative, the numbers were devastating. Derek's insistence on deploying his college friend's untested software had cost the firm over $5 million in lost freight revenue, cargo destruction claims, and emergency legal retainers. Furthermore, Meridian's legal counsel informed the board that Derek's actions had exposed the private equity firm to severe corporate liability for breach of fiduciary duty and gross managerial negligence. Under pressure from institutional investors, Meridian stripped Derek of his executive authority over logistics operations. He was quietly reassigned to oversee an underperforming regional car wash franchise operating in southern New Jersey, far removed from multi-million-dollar supply chains and federal transportation regulations. Chadwick Thorne's software startup in Austin suffered an even worse fate. As news of Synaptic Root's catastrophic failure and federal log falsification spread throughout the close-knit commercial transportation industry, two other major logistics carriers immediately canceled their software evaluation contracts with his firm. Facing imminent legal claims and financial insolvency, Synaptic Root ceased operations within 2 months. As for Vanguard Freight Systems, operational stability returned under my leadership as Chief Technology Officer. Trevor Finch's former glass-walled office was converted back into a functional technical operations bay. I retained my comfortable, windowed office overlooking the main truck yard, where I could watch the morning sunlight hit the chrome grills of our 18-wheelers as they pulled out of the terminal. On a crisp Friday morning 3 weeks after the crisis had been resolved, Vernon Hawkins walked into my office carrying 2 hot cups of coffee. He placed one on my desk next to my pewter mug and my rubber truck stress toy. Vernon leaned against the doorframe, watching a line of loaded refrigerated trailers pull slowly toward the interstate access ramp. "Ray," he said with a warm smile, "the drivers on Channel 9 were talking this morning. They said the new dispatch routes are running smoother than they have in years." I smiled, taking a sip of coffee. "That is because the system guiding those rigs was built by someone who understands what happens on the highway. Vern, it was built by people who know that behind every data point on a computer screen is a real human being driving 50,000 pounds of steel down a dark road to support his family. You cannot replace 30 years of operational experience with corporate buzzwords and unproven computer algorithms. You cannot automate human judgment, real-world relationships, and strict adherence to federal safety statutes. Executives in tailored suits can talk about operational synergy all they want. But at 6 o'clock on a Monday morning, when 412 trucks hit the highway, the only thing that matters is having a system that works, built by someone who cares enough to make sure every single driver gets home safely." I leaned back in my executive chair, lifted my coffee cup toward the window as the heavy diesel engines rumbled in the yard below, and watched another Vanguard truck roll out right on schedule. Some lessons in business are expensive, but standing up for operational excellence, legal integrity, and the working men who keep the nation moving will always be worth every single cent.